Hello, thank you for joining us once again on Fascism on Film. This is Season 2. I'm James Kent. Along with me is Teal Minton.
How's it going?
I don't know if you're just joining us for the first time or have you caught up on Season 1 and now you're ready to dive into fascism on film at a little bit of a deeper level, I guess.
Or a different angle, perhaps.
Yeah, and some of them will be like, could have, it's not like something has to have been in its own season. Some of the movies that we're going to talk about certainly could have been in Season 1.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we've kind of gone over a lot of the fascism basics. And now we're taking, a little bit more of a deeper approach. And just, I don't know. Again, I don't know if there was an overarching theme here for Season 2. What do you think?
Well, I would say it's sort of life under fascism, living under fascism, as opposed to being at war or something like that. And so it's just sort of what it's like to live in this situation where there is this kind of government and there are these restrictions on rights and things like that. And how do we, how have people dealt with that throughout history?
Yes. And we make this disclaimer here at the beginning of the show that any similarities to the movies that we'll be talking about and things you might be experiencing in your own life are strictly coincidental. I can't be helped with the fact that the movies that we're talking about, as we've rewatched them, they strike an eerily similar tone to some of the things that we've been going through in the last 6 months.
Yeah, and today we're talking about This Land Is Mine, Jean Renoir's film from 1943, which is about a unnamed European country. Could it be France? Perhaps. Could it be the country that Jean Renoir escaped and came to Hollywood to make this film about? So it's a film about Nazi occupation of France and what it's like to live under that occupation and what sort of the moral difficulties are of it and how do you resist and how do you continue to go about your life and what is it like to live with soldiers on the streets and being questioned and being investigated and being surveilled all the time, and what is it like to live in that, and how do you defy it and resist it, or do you comply and cooperate?
Well, now, so it was released in 1943, probably started at the end of 42. They used to make movies really fast in Hollywood, right? They used to churn them out. And this film feels like it's really churned out. It's not a movie that I feel like over the years, maybe it's got its due or it just wasn't popular. It's really hard to find. And the copy that I've seen is not very good.
Yeah.
Could use a refresh.
It could use a refresh. And I think that the film, as opposed to something like The Mortal Storm, these propaganda films have to be able to survive on their own as a film outside of the propaganda. And there's a few reasons why I don't really think this film does.
We're going to get into all that. There's a lot to talk about in this movie, but, considering setting the stage, because a lot of people might have never heard of this movie.
Yeah.
And I certainly, until a few years ago when I first watched it, I had never heard of it. And Jean Renoir, like if people are wondering, well, who is he? I mean, he made two of the most famous films of all time.
Yeah.
Grand Illusion and Rules of the Game. They are, if you've seen them, they are masterpieces. He had a certain style and craftsmanship. And the interesting thing is that those are movies made over, in France. Yeah. And now he does escape and comes over to America while he still could get out. And then he makes this film. And, it's funny with some of these European filmmakers, they come over into the Hollywood system.
Yeah.
And that you don't see any of their real skill. It's weird. This movie feels like it could have been made by anybody.
Yeah, it feels like sort of standard Hollywood production with just medium shot close-up coverage, and it's not a cinematic masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination. It's a pretty standard Hollywood film of that era.
But yet Jean Renoir really wanted to make this film because he had a lot of nationalism for his beloved France, and they got steamrolled, and partly because they didn't really want to fight. The Vichy government really were appeasers, and they ended up becoming collaborators with Germany for peace. And that's a definite tone in this film. Again, it's one of the clues as to why they're talking about France, is that there is a lot in the screenplay about how to really achieve peace, it's better to go along and do whatever's necessary. And, as long as you're not basically, as long as you're not a Jew, you're in good shape. At least that's what the thought is, right?
That's what the thought is. One of my issues with the film is that there's like 20 minutes of speeches at the end.
There's a lot of speeches in the movie. The beginning speeches, especially by the professor, his is pretty effective. And, this is the second time I've watched the movie. And the first time, I think you liked it a lot. You actually told me to watch it, right? And
yes, I did. Yeah.
And I was like, this movie is so hokey and hammy, and I just thought it was a bunch of bunk, and I didn't like it. Now, I go in and I'm like, kind of was dreading having to rewatch this movie. And I'm like, boy, yeah, Teal is very high on this film. We were going to rewatch this thing. And there was an interesting thing that happened. The first half hour to 40 minutes of this movie,
yeah,
I was actually found it chilling and almost terrifying.
I totally agree.
Because what was 2 years ago hokey and very ham-fisted and over the top and very propagandas of fascism's bad, and
it's a propaganda film, which means that it has really clear moral lines that it's leading the audience to choose certain actions for the characters.
But suddenly, after the 6 months we've experienced, the thing is, there's a lot of talk. We throw out the word, boy, what's going on is fascism and authoritarianism and all of these things.
Yeah.
And sometimes it sounds like noise. And then you watch a movie like this and you hear the same things are going on in the background as what's going on here.
Exactly the same things. And people, this is what I like about propaganda films, is that it gives the characters these really clear moral choices. And that, I think, sort of lays out a lot of what we're going to be talking about this season is the life under fascism. I feel like all those themes are in this story already. And, the opening shot of this film is a little kid running out and playing in the street, and the mother runs out and grabs him and hurries him away right as the Nazis come rolling into town. And it's just a great image of how it's not safe to just go about your daily life anymore. The soldiers are here. You're under occupation. They're checking up on you. There's a subversive newspaper going around that they're questioning people who receive it or have a copy of it. And the first thing that really happens is the main character is Albert Lory, played by Charles Laughton, and he's a school teacher. And the first thing that happens is they are told to remove certain pages from their textbooks. There's a cleansing of history and thought that's going on from the Nazis are imposing this. And then there's Louise, sort of the other teacher that he's kind of in love with, played by Maureen O'Hara. And they're both asked to rip out the pages, and he plans to rip them out and dispose of them. She plans to rip them out and keep them so they can be returned later.
It's surrounded by flowery language that's very it's pro-democracy and freedom, yes. And someday we'll be able to put these pages back in their rightful place, all that kind of nonsense.
It's dressed up in all of that, but the fact of the matter is the two main characters are given this choice right in the first few minutes of whether to comply or resist. And Lory, the Charles Laughton character, he complies early on. And
he's a coward.
He is a self-professed coward. He says he's brave in his mind, but on the outside he's a coward.
He's a mama's boy, too.
And a mama's boy, and that's part of the issue, actually, is that his mother sort of bends the rules to get extra milk and meat for them, even though there's all these, everything's being rationed. And so he's sort of enjoying a slightly privileged place in this society. And he talks about, in his speech at the end, he talks about how it's easy for the workers to know that the occupiers are bad because the occupiers want to turn them into slaves. But the middle class could actually sort of start to think, well, this isn't so bad. And he's sort of in that group where it's not so bad, and he is sort of complying. And so each character in the film goes through these series of moral decisions about resisting turning people in. Do you sabotage things? And even the Nazi in this movie, played by Walter Slezak, this is Major Erich von Keller, is a really interesting Nazi character because he's not a sadist, and he's well educated. He's charming. He has humor. He appreciates practicality over cruelty. And so this is what I like about the film, is that each character is going through these things. And as you said, the things they're going through are recognizable to us.
Well, the thing on the commandant guy there, he is also a guy who doesn't want to accept responsibility for his actions. He's in charge, and he's such a, lighthearted about his business. But if the saboteur is not given up, the people must know who the saboteur is. And if they're not willing to give him up, all the hostages will be taken. And he goes into this whole speech about how that's bad business, because when we kill 10 people, then more of these people are going to rise up. He's seen it before. But he's basically saying that when they do actually round up 10 hostages or whatever, he's like, well, this isn't me. I didn't do this. The saboteur did it. You see, the saboteur is selfish and it doesn't care about the town. And it's like the mayor, who's capitulating as part of the Vichy government, he cares about the town because he's trying to, in his mind, save lives. But he doesn't care about the lives that Germany wants to kill, which is the Jews. And this is the first film that I remember at this time actually mentions Jews.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it actually does.
We find out that the professor that they take away, you don't know he's Jewish at first, but eventually it's revealed because he's taken away and his son is like bullied at school and a big J is written on his face.
Yeah, that guy, the mayor, is sort of doing like pragmatic collaboration. Just, well, this will be easier for everyone and I can protect the town doing this. But in fact, he's completely selling out everyone.
This is what I thought was chilling about the movie this time around. What we're seeing in real time here, we don't have necessarily an outside occupation happening in this country.
Right.
Well, this is what's chilling, is it's happening from within. We voted in this government. Yes. But what we're seeing is we're starting to see who's willing to resist, who's willing to stand up, but who's willing to completely turn a blind eye, and which local and state governments are willing to capitulate. And again, without getting into too many specifics, because I ended up having to edit them out of every episode, is that you'll see an example, and I won't give you the history time, but you see a state like Texas, full capitulation and cooperation and, willingness to do bidding. And then you have the state where I live in, where we are a very liberal state in all accounts. And I live in Vermont, and we have a governor who is Republican, very moderate at the time, but is basically trying his best not to be a quisling, but in many ways being a quisling, which is he's collaborating as much as to try not to stay in any trouble or keep out of the ire of the current administration, but at the same time isn't doing anything to resist or stand up for what they had previously said they know what's right. So we're watching a lot of blind eyeing happening in our own state.
And I think that, this question of collaboration versus resistance versus, I think, sort of doing nothing, right? Burying your head in the sand is kind of an option a little bit. And I feel like that's what the Charles Laughton character does to some extent. And in terms of real resistance, the one person doing real resistance in the movie is Louise's brother, Paul, who is actually out doing and working with the French resistance and doing sabotage and things like that. And so the second after the pages, Lory is confronted with having to cover for her brother. And he's over there visiting her. Paul climbs in the window after doing some sabotage, and then the Nazis show up. And he's confronted with, do I tell the truth and confess and turn this guy in, or do I lie and try to cover it up even though I'm a coward? And so in that choice, he is finally starting to step up a little bit and not be a coward, just by trying to cover that up. And it gets very complicated because then Paul does get captured, and there's this incredible sort of web this movie makes of all these different characters and their competing motivations and how they react to this. The mother is willing to do what it takes to save her son's life, even if it means giving up other people. And Lory is too. He's offered a deal at the end, which is, we'll let you go and we'll drop all the charges as long as you go back to the school and do Nazi indoctrination as a teacher. And that's his moment of bravery, is he stands up and says, I won't do that. You can let me free, but, I'm not going to be a Nazi. And
like, the movie gets very corny and ridiculous, but the fact that I think there was no way he would be found not guilty, because I think the jury would be so afraid of retribution. But so he's let go by the court, but that what he says in court is now going to basically make him public enemy number one of the Nazi regime, and he's going to get taken away, which of course
he does. Well, he goes back, he gets released, he goes back to school, and he is, with the students, he's going through the Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen, which is a French revolutionary document from 1789. And so it's sort of like our Declaration of Independence, but it's this whole thing about the rights of man. And he's going through this with the students at the end when the Nazis come in and take him away. And so he goes from tearing the pages out to appease them to actually going against them in the classroom. And that kind of courage is what the film is encouraging, really. I think, is to stand up, that bravery, the bravery to speak. Part of it is just that he gives this big speech in court at the end, but he makes this decision not to collaborate. And at one point, the Nazi says, "We're not tyrants. We prefer to collaborate." He's not there to impress he does ultimately use violence, but he would prefer not to use violence. He's trying to make those deals with Lory at the end, and Lory ultimately chooses bravery over cowardice. And that's, I think, is a powerful message.
I got some things I want to talk to you about in this. Well, first of all, so Charles Laughton, he has a certain style of acting, and it's always been over the top and hammy, but I think he's terrible in this movie. I think it's a horrible performance, maybe miscast, and it's so over the top, and there are certain scenes that I think what I'm talking about. They're so bad, and it's like that first scene when the Nazis come into the dinner table, and he has to pretend like him and Paul were there the whole time, and he's had to smoke that cigarette, and the coughing.
Yes.
It is just, the acting is just bad. I mean, there's no other way around it. I hate it.
I find it slightly comedic. So maybe my interpretation is
and I found that the tone is that's the wrong choice, in my opinion. And the mom is even worse.
She absolutely, I agree.
She's so bad. And so that movie, those are the things that really harm the movie for me. But yet I look at this film much differently now, because what this is saying is that we, as a nation, we went to war to stop the spread of fascism. We saw that it was wrong, but yet at the same time, here's these propaganda messages reinforcing it. But everything that you watch in this movie that's demonstrating what fascism is and how bad it is almost the stuff coming out is the stuff that we're seeing our current administration doing, and yet the defense against it, which this movie is, would be considered by people who support that regime as what they call woke.
Absolutely. No, this is a woke movie because it's pro-equality, pro-democracy, anti-violence, and in favor of freedom and justice. So it really is, and those are, like I said, the Declaration of Rights of Man and of the Citizen is a pretty woke document. I mean, the first thing is men are born and remain free and equal in rights. Wow.
By the way, I know that we're, white men who are over 50, so I guess we're entitled and almost expected to use that term woke. But I hate that term.
Yeah, no, I'm joking, but it's important. I think that there's a thread in this movie about the Nazis cracking down on knowledge. It's not an accident that they're teachers. There's another professor who gets taken away. You had mentioned the professor earlier, but the professor is also writing the resistance newspaper, and that is kind of actually the biggest threat. The Nazi guy says if you destroy the printing press, you destroy the rebellion, and they really fear knowledge more than anything else. Of course, Paul is out there doing physical sabotage, but they know that in order to control that, they're going to have to start with the information and the knowledge and the ideas.
The sad reality is that's the same today, because by and large, the statistics show that undereducated white people in this country are what voted for who's the president today. In huge numbers.
In huge numbers,
and if you had an education, you did not. And one side is exploiting undereducated people because that's what's going to give them and keep them in power.
Something I've been thinking about a lot lately is that the difference is, and it's mentioned in this movie, is that the blue-collar workers, and I mentioned this earlier, that they're the ones who the Nazis are trying to enslave, right? And so they actually are much more likely to be communist or socialist and anti-Nazi in this situation. And this is part of why Paul's sabotage is so dangerous to them, because he's sabotaging the sort of the blue collar infrastructure. But those people, I think, are more likely opposed to the Nazis in France than the middle class are.
But there's something this is what I wanted to ask you. I think it's interesting because it's something you've brought up in past episodes, and we see examples in it, and it's a tenet of fascism, and yet this film makes me not question it. I get it that it's a big component of fascism, but yet it seems to be almost universal. And so does this something where a tenet of fascism could permeate into other areas? And that is this idea of the heroic death. Because in this anti-fascist propaganda movie, the idea of being willing to sacrifice yourself to be a hero for the cause of freedom is something that is almost like this idea is an infectious tool that, if you kill these hostages that they've taken, you turn them into martyrs. That's one of the things that Charles Laughton sees when he is he's jailed for a time.
Yeah.
And he looks out the window and he sees these hostages being killed, including Professor Sorrell. And the professor knows he's dead, but he's so brave that he doesn't act as if he's about to get killed in 2 seconds. And he has time to look up at Lory and wave at him as if he's just saying, "Hey, how are you?" And that really makes the impact that maybe there are things worth dying for.
I think the film is definitely making that. Well, it's making that case because Lory decides to die at the end, essentially. He says, I'm willing to die for this. And so I think that it's a question of whether the film portrays, say, Paul's death as a glorious death that creates martyrdom or things like that, or if it's just really, give me freedom or give me death kind of thing, where it's actually better. I think Lory comes to that conclusion that he would rather be dead than be
a puppet or a slave.
Yeah, be a puppet or a slave. And so I think that's really the question. And I think that it's not, I think Paul's death doesn't have glory in it, right? He's kind of, even the way it's depicted, he's running away from them. It's not a big standoff with the police where he's putting up a big fight. They kind of just grab him.
So that's maybe a component that there has to be this kind of glorious, heroic act visual to. Exactly.
Yeah. And to sort of show the death. And I mean, if you look at like the end of, say, Hitler Youth Quecks, when Quecks dies, there's like angels and stars and all this stuff. And it's like, and there's speeches about Aryan brotherhood and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's different in this film because I think I think a moral choice is being made here. And that's, what happens over and over again. Are you choosing sabotage over safety? The reason when Renoir made this film is because he knew a lot of Americans and French exiles who were saying, why don't the French just resist? Why don't they just fight back? That would be easy. Here's a line I have from Lory's speech at the end, which I think sort of addresses this idea of death and what's how you weigh these moral decisions. He says,
"Can you do it in the Charles Laughton accent?"
I will definitely not do it in the Charles Laughton accent.
Okay.
We must stop saying that sabotage is wrong, that it does not compensate. Yes, it compensates. It makes us suffer, go hungry, and die. But although it increases our penalties, it will shorten our slavery. That sort of sums up what's going on in this film, is that you have to resist. It may be hard. You may die because of it. But it's the only way to shorten the slavery. And they see occupation as a form of slavery. These moral choices throughout the film, and it confronts us as the audience. What would you do if somebody snuck in the window to your dinner party and then the cops showed up? Would you cover for the person? Would you give them up to the cops? How much is your self-preservation worth versus your moral integrity? And those are questions that I think we all, if we aren't already, I know a lot of people are already asking those questions. And if you aren't already, I feel like you will be. And in some sense, watching these movies can help prepare us for those thoughts and help us think through where do we stand? I personally, I'm with Lory on this. I'm a coward. I don't like physical violence. But if I was presented this choice in prison of either become a Nazi or we execute you, I don't know what I would do. What would you do?
I would choose execution.
I think I would, but I'm also, like I said, I'm also a coward, and so I would have to.
I get. It's funny is philosophically, I always had a lot of thoughts about if I grew up in different times, where would I be?
Yeah,
and I knew in my heart what I would do. But I'm like, well, but I'll never have to find out. Well, you know what? I've had to find out now a little bit.
Yeah.
And I don't know how far what we don't know is how far this will go, but far enough that I've had to already be on the side of resisting to where I can.
Yeah.
But then, you have to watch and see kind of what happens and react to it. But what's horrifying to think in a country that for years, I think the first step that people need to do is to stay, is this normal? Did this ever happen before in my lifetime? And that first answer, if you were living in America, should be no. And then, it's different. And then ask, what is the good of this? And why?
Yeah.
What is the benefit? Is there any benefit? Again, you ask those questions, that kind of helps you sort out what side. And then, again, you hope that you don't have to make the choice.
You don't have,
but you don't know what's coming next. So you take it one step at a time, I think. But in my heart, I think that if I was in prison for these kind of political things and was chosen here, if you just do this for us, you can get out and free and you can enjoy life, or we're going to get executed. I probably, knowing myself, I'd probably say, well, I'm not going to be a Nazi.
Yeah, I think I would too, but I fear my own cowardice. There's another character we haven't really talked about, this guy, George Lambert, who's she's engaged to, Louise is engaged to, and he runs the rail yard. He's sort of the local industrialist, rich guy.
George Sanders.
Yep, played by George Sanders.
Who was in Confessions of a Nazi Spy.
Yes. Yep.
Yep. And sadly also took his life in similar ways that the character does in this movie.
That's terribly sad. So yeah, he's sort of this wealthy industrialist, and he is collaborating with the Nazis. He says to the Nazi at one point, "Your ideas are my ideas," because what they want is peace and industry and money. And as a capitalist, that can work just as well under fascism as not, or at least that's what he thinks.
Well, he's very much like Schindler, right? In yes. Schindler's List, where, I'm not going to worry about the down and the dirty. I'm not Jewish, not going to bother me. So how do I make a best of a bad situation? Whatever they want to say, sure, I'm for you, as long as I can, keep the rail yard running.
And he does sort of buy into this. Okay, well, this is the new government. Let's just cooperate and go along. And but eventually he ends up giving up where Paul is to the Nazis, and
who was a friend of his
and his fiance's brother.
Yep.
She calls off the engagement over this. I don't, but he makes that decision to collaborate as opposed to resist, and Paul dies because of it, and he can't handle. Lambert can't handle this, and so he takes his own life. And Charles Laughton, of course, is blamed for the murder, but that's another choice that this film gives you all the options, right? You can resist, you can comply, you can commit suicide, you can get executed, and this is what I like about the film, is that it goes through sort of from each character's perspective all the different choices and moral quandaries that you can be trapped in under occupation.
The movie is called This Land Is Mine. Director is Jean Renoir. And if you can find it, it might be another film that you want to take a look at. Because again, if you're feeling like, well, haven't we been down this road before and didn't we make different choices? Well, that's why movies like this might be something to take a look at. You can find us on Fascism on Film. And of course, we are on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and other outlets. But certainly, let people know this is our second season. And, we're going to go through a bunch of movies, and we look forward to discussing them. And the next film that we're going to talk about is a very interesting movie, another French film. Well, I'm sorry. It's a French film, actually about France, unlike this film, which just hinted at it.
Which is an American film about France. It's hinted, yeah.
And this film, of course, is directed by a one-time American filmmaker who's an expatriate who moved to France.
Who was blacklisted for being communist.
Yeah, but by the 70s, when this film was shot, he wasn't anymore. But he was.
Oh no, but that's why he went to England, because he was blacklisted for being a member of the Communist Party.
This director is Joseph Losey. The movie is called Monsieur Klein. We talked about this film in depth once several years ago on our other podcast, Stuff We've Seen, but in the different context at the time.
Yeah.
And so we have done a rewatch, and we're going to talk about it in our next episode. So please stay tuned for that.
Sounds great. Bye-bye.
Bye.